Hi, everyone, and welcome to The X, a podcast from inside Silicon Valley about how experience shapes everything, from products to businesses to entire industries. I'm Brian McLean, and I'm here with Demetrius Madrigal.
You're watching the most exciting game you will ever see on your TV set. Telstar by Coleco, with 3 different games. Telstar Tennis, with digital scoring, variable speeds. Telstar Hockey. Each player controls a goalie plus a forward on the other side. Oops, a goal. And Telstar Singles Handball, a game you play yourself. Telstar Handball, Tennis, Hockey. All 3 at an exciting low price. For great family fun, hitch your TV to a Telstar by Coleco.
So that is a commercial from 1976 talking about the Telstar from Coleco, which is the very first game that they released, which was Pong. And for those of you who are much younger than us, Pong was basically this game where you have a paddle and you move the paddle on the bottom of the screen and the top of the screen back and forth. And there's a little square that is supposed to be like a ball, and you kind of bounce it back and forth without letting it pass. And that wasn't, frankly, that long ago. And here we are today. I mean, that was 1976, which I wasn't even born.
For the record, that was before either of us were born.
That's true. But if you look at
we're not that old.
Yeah, but if you look at the quality of that game and what they were releasing back in 1976 compared to what we are going to discuss today about Unreal Engine version 5.2 that was recently announced, unbelievable progression in the gaming industry and stuff. So first off, good morning, Dee. Big question for you today before we jump into this topic. Have you charged your phone in a public space lately?
No. I guess unless you count my car while I'm driving around, no, I haven't really had the need to.
Good, because the FBI just released their warning that a lot of these skimmers and things like that are happening in public space charging stations. And the reason why I mention it is because I have used them like maybe twice in my life. Like you go somewhere and you're like, oh, my phone's really low. I'll plug it in. I'll sit right next to it. I don't want anyone to run off with it. And I have always had that weird feeling in the bottom of my stomach that like, I'll do it at the airport because the airport one is provided by them or something. But like, I've never sat in a quote unquote public space, like a shared space in the middle of a city or something like that, and charged my phone. I always have thought to myself, like, where, what can it access my phone? Like, there's always been like a little thought in there, not a big worry or anything, just a thought. And then to hear this, I was like, oh my God, like lots happening that the FBI has to make an announcement nationwide.
Well, I've never used one of those charging stations. I have little like charging batteries that I got on Amazon that I take with me sometimes. So I'll just charge my phone while I'm out using one of those. I just throw one in my laptop bag, and it's always there for me. I have never felt super comfortable using those, partially because you're tethered to a location. You don't know what this stuff is doing. I'm actually was not too concerned about the data because I know, well, at least for Android phones, and imagine that iPhone's similar, is that in order for it to access data on your phone, you have to approve it. And maybe there's some way that they're hacking around that, but it would take a little bit of work to do that. But regardless, I was more concerned about like the crappy charger with a power surge frying my phone than anything else.
Yeah. Both of us went to San Jose State. That's a fact. Do you remember the location in San Jose State where they have the Bank of America ATMs? Do you remember that?
Wasn't that at Student Union?
Yeah, it was near the Student Union. Somebody showed me a video last night of skimmers that they found on those. That people had placed them on the left and right side and blended them in so that when you're using your card and stuff like that, and I guess found that people are trying to skim credit card numbers from there. Like, that's crazy, dude.
This is one of the reasons why I tell people to use Google Pay or Apple Pay whenever possible, because they cannot get your credit card number from that. They use an expiring token. It's much more secure than actually using your credit card.
Yeah, 100% agree. Like I think a lot of people don't know that, but it actually is more secure. And that's pretty much something that I've been using pretty exclusively this year. Like last year, I used my card a lot, but like this year I started using the phone more, and it's kind of nice actually. And it's nice to know that it's very secure.
Yeah, it's faster, it's easier, more secure, and then it logs all of your purchases, and you can see what happened or what you paid for, and you would easily see, you get a notification whenever you pay for something. So if there is like some illegal activity, which has never happened to me, then it would show up. You'd get a notification somebody just spent X amount of dollars at whatever store. and you'd know right away.
So let me ask you something. So today we're talking about Unreal Engine, and we're talking about this new version 5.2 that came out and has incredible potential. And you're going to jump in and start talking about some of the details, and we'll kind of explore those a little bit. But let me ask you, what is the first realistic game you remember playing? And I mean realistic, not like Pong and that kind of stuff, but like where you look at it and it looks like a real world, and it kind of like captivated you and drew you into it. Which one was it?
I mean, they're so. What's interesting when we're talking about AI and gaming, I keep thinking about the history of my experience with AI, and one of them was Metal Gear Solid, the first one.
Oh
But it was a very
yeah.
realistic environment in the way that it was rendered.
Yep.
But that was the first time that I can remember having AI enemies that responded to their environment. Like if they saw your footsteps in the snow, they would follow them and they would try to look for you, and you could throw like an empty magazine or something in order to distract them. There were all these things that you could do that the AI would do in reaction to what was going on in the game, as opposed to just pre-programmed patterns going back to like probably the ColecoVision and all these old systems that we're talking about. As far as kind of AI behavior that stands out to me, I think when it comes to video game like the graphics and environments, I probably played something earlier than this, but one thing that really stands out in my mind was the Uncharted games, even though
Yep.
they were not open world, looked amazing. And Horizon Zero Dawn, which was an open world game, the foliage and environments that were rendered there were just unbelievable. And other than the like actual characters, which I don't think were intended to be fully photorealistic,
Yeah.
a lot of that looked basically photorealistic to me.
The one that really comes to mind for me, and this is going to go way back, but I think it's going to bring back some memories for you, was Dragon's Lair, 1983.
Definitely also not realistic. Also not playable.
So, how dare you,
It's
first of
the
all, just
word.
because you were a terrible player doesn't mean you need to judge the game. No, actually, that was one
Yeah.
of the hardest games I've ever played in my entire life. And I think it was because, so I don't know if you know this, but they actually used laser disc on that. So
Hmm.
in the arcade game itself, it had a laser disc inside of it, and it was spinning, and basically it had marker points, and you had to be able to like move the joystick at the exact moment when the marker point happened. Otherwise, you didn't kind of advance the next level. But it looked so realistic compared to everything that I had tried up to that point.
Well, it was
And
animated. It looked like it was a Don Bluth thing, so it looked like American Tail and those kinds of things. It didn't
yes,
it didn't look like the real world.
well, I mean, the 2002 version, really kind of stepped it up because that was I think it was called Return to the Lair. It was like the 3D version. But they were ahead of their time when they did that, though. Because I remember walking up to that game and looking at it, and yeah, it was animated, but it actually felt like kind of not real, as in like, oh, it looks like a real person. But it definitely felt like I was part of a real adventure, like because I was being sucked into
Sure.
it. And then it was actually um, Mist, which I think was
Oh wow.
1993. And I remember looking at Mist and I was like, oh, this is amazing. This stuff is getting so good. And that was in 93. So that was around the time that we were making a pretty big transition from arcade games to PC
Yeah.
games and things like that.
While we were talking about dragons, I'll say one last thing. I think it's basically a crime that we never, to my knowledge at least, had a Dragon Slayer movie or a TV show that really told that story. Because I don't know what happened once you get past the drawbridge, because that's as far as I got,
Oh,
which was
I
basically like
never,
the
dude.
first screen.
I spent so much money on that game and I don't think I ever got past the drawbridge either. Like it was
I
incredibly difficult.
I know that people have because I've seen it in videos and stuff, but I've never met a human being in person who got past the drawbridge.
Yeah. Yeah. It was it was one of those games where you so badly wanted to see what was going to happen next, but you could never do it no matter how many quarters you put in. And
Yeah.
a part of me wants to buy the arcade game and bring it to my house and just like hammer it and just see if I can get through it.
Well, you can. Let's make that a challenge for you. If like, all right, let's have Brian finish Dragon's Lair, the original arcade game. You can go out and buy like reissues of those arcade games nowadays.
Oh yeah, yeah. Or you can find the original one, which they do go up for sale, but they're a little more expensive to get.
Yeah, I think they're in like several $1,000s for a Dragon's Lair.
Yeah, yeah. I've always kind of had this like little dream in the back of my head that at some point I would find some like industrial space, and then I would buy all the best games and just turn it into some cool place people can come and hang out, and maybe not even like the general public, but just like all of our friends. We're just like, hey,
Yeah, I
everyone,
think that's called an arcade.
yeah, let's go meet. Let's go meet at our arcade slash office, business office, or something like that. You know what I mean?
I
Sounds like
actually have a
fun.
friend who has an entire arcade in his garage. He probably has like 30 different coin operated games. Some of them are like some of the
30.
reissues. Some of them are like the original
Uh
ones,
huh.
including I think he has a Street Fighter and a Mortal Kombat 2.
What happened to your
Uh,
Street Fighter? Didn't you have the original Street Fighter arcade?
so me and my best friend, when we were kids, we bought those together. He has the Street Fighter Champions Edition and a Mortal Kombat 2 and the original Street Fighter 2, the non hyper fighting non Champions Edition. It's all in his garage. So whenever I go
Right.
down to Disneyland, because he's a friend of mine who works at Disneyland, we spend some time playing some games out in the garage.
That's awesome. That's cool that you were able to keep it. I mean, I had Miss Pac-Man that I refurbished and then redid the chips on the board, and then I
Mm-hmm.
had Street Fighter, and I had one more in college, and then we ended up selling them because it's really hard
Yeah.
when you're moving between apartments, right? At some
Mm-hmm.
point, you're just like, well, I just have to sell these things. And actually, the most fun was actually repairing them and getting some of the original art for the
Yeah.
sides of the cabinets and stuff, and fixing them up and stuff because eBay was selling that stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
those were the exciting times. And I kind of miss it. I was like, I kind of want to redo one again from
Yeah,
scratch.
the original Street Fighter 2, the non-champions edition, the original one, the first came out, in its original cabinet. We got that for $200
I
back, like I want to say 99 or something like that. Somebody offered my friend like $5,000 for it a little while ago, and he
wow.
keeps it. He's an electrical engineer, so he keeps it fully maintained and ready to go too.
Yeah, it's one of those things where there was a dead period when I think you and I and everyone bought these things because nobody wanted them in a garage anymore, and now they're collector
Hmm.
items.
I mean, they were being sold by arcades that were being shut down,
Yeah, and that's
so
when we bought
they
ours.
just liquidated. Yeah, absolutely.
So, well, I guess we should jump in and talk about the Unreal Engine stuff. Why don't you kick it off and tell us what some of this stuff is all about?
So they recently, I think, the end of March, I want to say, and it's early April as we're recording this. They had Epic Games had a State of Unreal event, and they announced their plans for the future and what is going to be coming in Unreal Engine 5.2. And we looked at it, and we both kind of had this like, oh my god, reaction, and thought it had incredible potential. But before we get into that, for anybody out there who's listening who isn't very familiar with Unreal Engine and the games industry, I'll give you a brief history. So Unreal Engine is a graphics engine. So it's part of a gaming engine that is responsible for rendering the graphics and visuals. It was originally developed for video games by Todd Sweeney, which is going to be a very familiar name for anybody who's deep into video games. And his team at Epic Games, the company that's now, I think, owns Fortnite, and they have the Epic Games Store, and are not without their own share of controversy. Back then, it was 1998. It was they named the engine for the video game Unreal. It's a first-person shooter similar to Counter Strike and those kinds of games. It was, as far as I know, developed for Unreal, and it was named for it for that reason. It was the first game that had it. Where it becomes really interesting is that after developing it, Epic Games made the source code available on GitHub, so anybody can use it, and they can use it for free. But if you're going to commercialize it, you have to pay a royalty. So, and then what makes it even more interesting is that they waive the royalty for games until they reach $1 million in revenue. $1 million in revenue. So if you're an indie gamer or somebody who's just using it for private use or something like that, you can access the source code. There's all this education out there for it. You can just use it, and then unless you're making a bunch of money off it, you don't have to pay anything. And even then, there are ways to not pay. Like I think if you release it for the Epic Games on the Epic Games Store, you don't have to pay. So it became a resource for a lot of people out there. And I remember at one point working with a company that was doing some testing with simulations. I was like, why don't we just use the Unreal Engine instead of these overpriced, terrible, like virtual fighter looking human models that you're using? Why don't we use
Yeah.
that? They decided not to because of just that's what they already had. They were wanting to keep their momentum. But the thing about the Unreal Engine is that they've continued to make to advance the graphics engine, and it's very, very impressive, and it's widely used. Number of industries beyond just video games because of its capabilities and because it's relatively easy to use compared to some other graphics engines that are out there. So the latest version, Unreal Engine 5, which I think it came out a year or two ago, it updated how the engine renders objects in the environment using this technology they call nanites, and added a graphics library, so you can actually go and grab something that's pre-rendered in their library and just drag and drop it into your interface. And they've actually been slowly acquiring graphics libraries that are out there. Some of them, user generated. Some of them, I think, that were converted from photography and those kinds of things. So they've continued to build that out, and that was one of the announcements they made was kind of evolving that marketplace.
Uh-huh.
And then update 5.1 further improved this. They changed the way that lighting was handled, so that instead of having to use these like pre-constructed light maps, they had actual real dynamic lighting, so that if you had a light bulb that was swinging around or weird shadows moving around, it was fully dynamic, and everything the light was rendered real time, and it became much more realistic. And I think it also, because of the way they did it, I think it was a system called Lumen, it would actually use fewer resources.
Yeah. So just to pause you there for a second there, this is super, super interesting. Is that when you're talking about version Unreal Engine 5, The Mandalorian was actually
Mm-hmm.
produced with Unreal Engine 5. So that huge screen that they use to project like him walking across the desert or,
Mm-hmm.
in the jungle or whatever it is, right? John Favreau decided to use Unreal in order to produce the imagery of that. So when you're watching that show and you see him running around the desert or driving on his speeder bike or whatever it is, it's all done with the Unreal Engine. And it feels
Yeah.
very real to us.
Yeah, and that's so if you look up what Unreal Engine 5 renders look like, and it continues to look better. 5.1 looked even better. 5.2 is going to look even better than that. I think there was a limitation with foliage at one point that they were able to overcome. And the fluid dynamics looks amazing. It looks photorealistic. It looks real. And the environment you're talking about is called the volume, and they
Mm-hmm.
use it for filming for a variety of things. The Batman was filmed largely in the volume. It's kind of that evolution from just using like green screen environments
Yep.
to pre-rendered environments or even live rendered environments now with this update. And it can help, I think, with the actors and the directors get a feel for what that environment is and much more immersive. It's basically a cave VR system as opposed to a head mounted. Cave VR system is where you're surrounded by screens that are creating your virtual environment.
We actually experienced some of this at NASA when we worked there. It was very early on, but they had a cave where they were doing a lot of experiments in them.
Yeah, KVR has been around for a long time. One of the advantages is that you can be less likely to experience simulator sickness because it's not strapped to your head, and
Mm.
you're not experiencing lag in quite the same way. And even back then, when we had like really like low res kind of blocky graphics, you would still have a lot of like the cliff phenomenon.
Yep.
If you're not familiar with that, if you put on a VR, if you're in a VR system, either head mounted or a cave, and you're presented with a cliff, even though you know that's not a real cliff, you will feel like as though you'll feel that kind of like anxiety sinking feeling, like don't step off it. And if people are directed to step off it, they have a really hard time doing though, even though it's not a real cliff and they know it's not a real cliff.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember experiencing that stuff at NASA a little bit. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm yeah, definitely familiar.
Yeah. I mean, those VR systems and virtual environments were kind of my area when we were at NASA. So it was one of the things that I was really into. That brings us up to what was released this past week, and that was 5.2, or it wasn't released, it was announced and they gave a demo. And there were two major reasons why we looked at this and were just awestruck. One of those is instead of having just a library or handcrafted environments, it is going to allow procedurally generated content. So that means that if you kind of give it an idea of what you want, it will fill in the rest. So, for example, in this demo, they had artists create a relatively small amount of an environment. So in this demo, it was like a jungle environment with like riverbeds and mountains or cliffs and things like that. And then the engine just auto generated the rest. And the demo also showed an artist editing the environment in real time, nothing pre-rendered. It was dragging and dropping assets in, and then you'd see the engine kind of filling in, adding like there's a log here, there's a rock here, and then they could easily just say like I put a rock slide here, and it would adding a rock slide, and it would just dynamically fill the environment in. Um, and I was you when they show this, you hear the crowd gasp because it is crazy. What did you think when you saw it, Brian?
I mean, I think I was the first one that shared the video with you. It was somebody who posted it on LinkedIn. And the fact that I was so motivated that I shared it with you on LinkedIn, where you don't check messages on there. Like, I don't send you things on LinkedIn. But because
Yeah.
it was so good, I was like, oh my God, he's got to see this. Well, my first thought is, and this is just how my brain works when it comes to gaming stuff. And I know it's kind of strange and very like basic, but I was just like, wow, this is not shitty. Right, like I just imagine drag and drop and AI stuff because look, I know AI is the big craze right now and everyone's talking about it and they should because there's some really good AI stuff like GPT and stuff like that that's been released. But the industry's been talking about AI for like over a decade, 20 years or something, right? So like I've heard this come up and go down and come up and go down, and every time you'd see something, it's like you're like, it's okay, right? And then now the stuff that I'm seeing is like, okay, this is what we hoped for. And I saw that demo and I thought to myself, oh man, this changes everything. You know what it changes? It also changes education because
Yes.
when you're going to school to become a graphic artist or an animator, things like that, you're coming in right now with this quality level, right? So you can actually
Hmm.
spend more time focusing on the creativity and less time on the finite changes and modifications that are needed to make it feel real, right? You can
Yes.
be storytelling more and less time on like fixing stuff that doesn't work, and so I saw this and I was like, up, huge leap, here we go. Like this is
Yeah.
basically starting a brand new era of development.
Yeah. You called it out with the AI. That was one of the first things that I noticed. Also, was just the only way to do this is with AI. Like there is an AI who is filling in all the gaps that you're not that the artists are not devoting their time to, and that is should take a lot of the effort and time um, away from the artist. So I think for something like this, you're still going to need a digital artist in order to kind of craft these spaces and to kind of establish the look and feel. And then the AI is just like this amazing like staff of assistants who are all kind of like replicating based on your architecture in order to kind of fill in the rest of the space. And at a time when 3D digital artists are at a premium because there's a shortage, this can make all of them way, way more productive. And I'm hoping, who knows, I'm hoping it'll help with all the crunch that they've had of having to work crazy long hours and nights and weekends and
Yeah,
things like
I
that.
do have a question though. Like my brain always goes back to the business side of things, and I wonder if this actually brings more movies and gaming development back to the studio. So you know how we're always like, you always hear like, oh, this team went out to Alabama because they had to shoot this particular scene or that kind of stuff. I wonder if now we're going to come back, kind of like Mandalorian did, right? Bring it back into these large studios like in LA and New York and other places where these exist. And you're spending more time like doing the acting in front of these large like screens and then using the Unreal Engine in order to create the environments that you want because the reality of it is so good, right? Like you don't need to actually fly everyone to this location and actually physically do it in the jungle because it looks just like it. It acts just like it. It functions like it. Is this maybe the beginning of seeing things come back into the studios?
Well, I think a lot of things are primarily done in the studios these days. I think that shooting on location has for a while been a bit of an outlier, and I think the reasons why you choose to shoot on location is for and we're not in that industry, but this is what I hear from people who do so, is that being in that environment, like being in another culture, if you're in another country, for example, it kind of evokes elements of that can be captured in the performance.
Mm-hmm.
Or captured in the set designs and
Yeah.
things. Like you can, if you're shooting in Pakistan or Malaysia or any other kind of exotic place that we're not very familiar with as Americans, then that cast and crew just being there could learn things about the culture that can affect how they're going to portray it on screen.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, I definitely know there's benefits there, but this just makes me think that you're a bean counter,
yeah,
at a big studio, and you're like, why don't you just do what the Mandalorian did, and we could do it right across the street over in our huge
yeah.
warehouse and get it all set up, and you can do an entire series right there.
I think if it depends on what you're doing, I think for sure. Um, I I also think that if you are shooting, a western, it's easier to just drive an hour out of town and out of or it's Los Angeles, so it's probably gonna be like 2 or 3 hours out of town. The traffic you have to deal with. But like you look back at a lot of those old westerns, you look at even Star Trek when they're portraying other worlds,
Yeah.
and they were like in like Barstow or like Lone Pine, like parts of California,
Yeah, it's true.
right? They didn't have to go that far. What I think will be interesting is if they are filming something that is, out. One of the ways it's used is that it's being used to tell stories we couldn't tell very effectively before,
True.
like the Mandalorian, like the Marvel stories where they're going to Titan and these other planets and things like that, or things that are in space. But to bring it back to your point, if you are shooting on location and it is like a difficult place to access or has a unique look, like maybe you're shooting um, in some place like Ukraine, and then a war breaks out and you can't go back for reshoots. Well, now you can do reshoots in the volume with using Unreal in order to support that.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's unbelievable how far it's come. It's so exciting. Like I look at it and I think this is going to create some amazing content down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, but just fundamentally, the capability to do this in order for it to read the artist's intent, in order to fill these things in, and then the artist can go back in and make edits and stuff. It is one of the best implementations of AI that I've seen. It's, I think, the most impressive implementation of AI that I've seen. To me, I'm much more impressed by this than I am with ChatGPT,
Yeah.
because I think one of the things about ChatGPT is like how much it can resemble a human being. And in this case, I look at this and say, like, this just surpassed what humans can do, at least within the time constraints that are provided.
Yeah. And for everyone who's listening, D is a hypercritical person to technology. Like meaning he objectively looks at it and really kind of doesn't um doesn't evaluate it based on his emotions as much as he will say, okay, well, what is it really doing for us? Does it actually work properly? That kind of stuff. I'm more emotion based. I see it and I'm like, woo, let's do this. Like, this is amazing. I want to be part of this. And so for you to say like, hey, like, I really see this being a huge leap in the field and in the space,
Mhm.
to me, that's a big thing.
Yeah, I mean, I look at first what is the utility as opposed to is it more for show? And I look at ChatGPT and I think the natural language they cracked natural language process. They they have solved it. They have resolved that. That was one of the most difficult computing challenges that we've tried to tackle in our lifetime, and they have solved it. As far as making it a something that has utility beyond just going to Google and doing searches, I haven't yet found it there yet. And what I've seen as far as the ability to generate word based content is impressive for a technology, but it's not very impressive for a human being. It's
Yeah.
I've so far that I've found.
Yeah. The thing about it is those you were mentioning to me about the meta-human animation. Like
Oh yeah,
that, I know you're going to talk about that. But that's really tough. Like I've
oh yeah.
noticed that the ability for a human being to look at a human generated by AI, or even generated through like many, many, many years of like refinement through like an animation or anything like that, you can see subtleties where you go like, that's not right. Or like no one would lift
Mhm.
their eyebrow like that. Like we are really good at picking up on those subtleties. What did you think about the kind of meta-human technology that was released from them?
So yes, this is the second big advancement that was shown in 5.2 demo. So they had these things called metahumans that they had in previous versions. I think it was out in 5.1 or 5.0. But what it allowed you to do is to easily create photorealistic or stylized human models, including facial models, that were shockingly easily and quickly compared to where it was done previously, where everything was done by hand. What the previous options didn't have was very good animation. You had to like have very complex like animation rigs that like simulated every single muscle that existed in the face and the body, and then you had to manually drag each one for every single keyframe. Now this update allows you to essentially do performance capture with a smartphone. You know, when you've seen before and you've seen, how they filmed like the Avatar movies, or they put all the little dots on their face and the
Yep.
camera's like sitting right over their head, or you see a video of how they did the Last of Us video games, or any of the major video games recently, and they're doing the performance capture. They're able to do it with a smartphone. No blue dots on the face, no like complicated like motion capture suits, none of that stuff. It's literally just I'm going to point a camera at you. It's going to capture a digital model of all the movements that you're having, and then this AI is going to decode it in the back end and animate it onto your metahuman model in such a way that the animation is incredibly impressive. Like it looks like it looks like a human spent an unbelievable amount of time animating every single one of these muscles and skin movements in order to get this incredibly realistic animation. And it's mind blowing they're able to do this with just a cell phone camera.
I know. But you look at it though, and these cell phone cameras are incredibly advanced now, right? So I mean, they're better than some of the cameras that were used to make movies, 15 years ago, right? So it makes sense that it's now starting to meet in the middle where you can actually use the stuff that's in your pocket in order to help you build, the movie or the game or whatever it is
Yeah,
that you really want or you desire, that or that's in your head, right? It's like it's going to change
yeah,
everything. I mean, I heard that the stuff that's coming out of the schools right now, like the quality of the like, final thesis of like create this, what is it, a trailer, or is unbelievable compared to the way it was like a decade ago.
yeah. For me, it's super impressive because I don't know if there are limitations to this. Usually, I think when they're doing a performance capture with those cameras, I think they're stereo optic cameras. That way, you can get a sense of depth into the digital model. I don't know if they're doing this with a single camera. I don't know how they're establishing their tracking points, like the blue dots that are on people's faces in motion capture suits. I don't know how they're doing it, but they somehow, and I'm sure there's limitations to it. I'm sure that the full performance capture rigs that you see, like Hollywood films use, are potentially more advanced. I'm sure they're more advanced and they have more capabilities. But for them to do this so that any creator out there, any indie game developer, anybody who wants to create a short film for YouTube can now use this in order to create animations, I think is my jaw dropped when I saw it.
Yeah, absolutely. I The big question that actually came to mind when this dropped and I kind of saw the video and everything was how close do you think we are to actually being able to create quote unquote real humans and not use real actors anymore? Like that was the first question that came to mind for both the games and the movies.
Well, ultimately, I think what you're getting from an actor is them crafting a performance, interpreting a character, and putting that up on screen. And if the character is well crafted and the performance is well crafted, then the audience is going to relate to that character no matter how it's presented.
Yeah.
I remember watching an animated movie called Grave of the Fireflies from, I think it was in like 1984 or 1985. And those characters, even they're animated, they look like cartoon characters, they look like drawings, but you connect with those characters, you empathize with them. It's a very emotional movie. So I think you have been able to have photorealistic creatures or animals or humans on screen for quite some time. You might not have always noticed it. I mean, we've been aware of characters like Groot and Golem and stuff like that for a while.
Yeah.
And from what I understand, every now and then, if they need like a human figure in the background, they have inserted them every now and then. So it's been there for a while. But regardless of whether or not you have a photorealistic animated presentation of a character on screen, you're still going to need somebody to craft that performance, and the best people to do that are going to be actors.
Hmm.
So I don't think the the discipline of acting is going away, but I do think that the way in which it is presented, the types of characters that can be shown, that what happens to those characters, like if they're aging a lot or reverse aging or being transformed in some way, I think that the flexibility of that is going to open up tremendously through this.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, like you made a really good point about background characters, right? It's really, really difficult to go find, let's say, 100 extras for a movie,
Hmm.
right? Or 1,000 extras, right? For something that's going on where you want people running down the streets or whatever it is. If this gets good enough, I feel like it's going to be much harder as like an extra, for example, to get those gigs because you would just say, "Give me 1,000 people, make sure all their faces are different," uh, uh, just make them all different, and also give them all this hair color or whatever it is, right? And then suddenly it's just there with the click of a button, right? That changes everything.
Yes, it can. I think they're still going to use extras because I think it's easier to like use those extras in order to establish kind of what we're looking at. It's one of the reasons why if you look at how video games are made, a lot of the like guns and costumes and things that they use in the game, they make actual 3D models out of them.
Yeah,
Like they make the actual physical, like if you're using a lightsaber, they make the lightsaber. There's a physical model of the lightsaber, even though it's not used in the game. It's all animated.
yeah,
But they make them in order to get a sense of how they move and like how they interact with space and like what their weight is and all those kinds of things. They kind of did this for the Lord of the Rings movies, right? When they're doing the Battle of Helm's Deep and things like that, they had like 50 to 100 extras. I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember the exact number, who were in costume, who were running around, and they filled in the rest with CGI.
hmm,
Like a lot of like getting to the thousands of people in that army, like in Lawrence of Arabia, and those kinds of movies. Instead of having cast of thousands, they had a few dozen extras and then filled in the rest with CG. So that was what I think that was 20 years ago now.
yeah. I mean, I was watching this documentary about the original creators of Star Wars and how a lot of these people worked at Industrial Light and Magic and just like their whole process and stuff. And one of the things that they mentioned on there was that like there was a transition where it's like if you didn't change your skill set from practical effects, to CG and really focusing on that, you kind of got left behind because a lot of these movies now, let's say what was 50% practical effects 20 years ago is now 10%, right? And so it's like, yeah,
Mhm.
you create that lightsaber. Yeah, well, I created one. How many people do you need to create one, right? The majority of those people who created that stuff before are now focusing on this. And so I ask you the question: is that if this is an area that's evolving so deeply and getting so good as it expands to other spaces, like you had mentioned to me, real estate or space design, theme parks, retail store development, are we going to start seeing the discipline of animators kind of spread out across the industry because we're going to need that skill in all of these different areas now so that we can invent our dreams basically in these different spaces.
I think it will. I think one of the things for things like real estate, like I can imagine somebody using Unreal in order to create like really advanced like virtual tours of real estate. I can
Hmm.
see somebody using it in architecture in order to like create previs models of how this building is going to look and what the interiors could look like, and maybe they'll use that even before they start going beyond the very earliest planning stages. Maybe it'll be used to raise money. Maybe it'll be used to sell property before it's built. There's all kinds of things you can do with it. I think that will involve different levels of animators, right? So you're going to have, kind of like what we have with website design now, right? Where you can have somebody who's going to help you build your WordPress site
Hmm.
is going to be a very different level of web designer than somebody who's building out a massive mobile app for an interactive like e-commerce site, for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah. Yeah. There's going to be varying degrees of it. You're going to see more. I mean, this is an exciting time. I almost feel like it would have been a really interesting area of expertise to get into. Like if I was in my 20s right now, or in college, I think it might be a place to go into where I'd be like, okay, this is super exciting. I can now work on some pretty cutting edge stuff where I'm getting like experience in AI, but also design, creativity, and also really thinking about storytelling. And like I said before, like I actually really feel like the easier it is for these tools to generate what we can dream up, the more time we spend on the story itself, which is going to
Yeah,
enhance the overall stories. And it doesn't mean a story of just gaming or movies. It's like you said, it could be the story of a new real estate project, or it could be the story of a theme park. I recently saw artist conceptions that were done really well, obviously by the animators at Disney in the Imagineers. Sorry, not a
hmm,
blank. And they were showing how they were kind of expanding Disney or something like that. And it was clear that they used this type of technology in order to like suck you in and bring you into the experience, so that you can get a full idea of what this new land, is going to be all about. And I'm like, it looks so real now. It's like I already imagined myself being there. Like, how
yeah.
exciting is that, right? And it's just only getting better. So I don't know. This is super awesome. I'm excited about it. I'm glad we decided to talk about this, because I feel like it's an area where we just kind of, to some extent, go, well, yeah, it's just assume that the games are gonna get better. But the engineers and the creatives and the product people that are behind making this a reality are killing it. They're hitting home runs. I'm very proud of them.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously it affects video games, and we've talked a little bit about how it would affect movies and TV. And I think it'll ultimately, hopefully, unlock more creativity, like open up resources, help alleviate the shortage that's going on, all those kinds of things. I think for content creators, it can do something very similar. But what about the metaverse? How do you think that something like this is going to affect the metaverse?
Well, I think it's going to make it more realistic, and it's also going to make it easier to create really large, gorgeous open worlds. And I think it will
Hmm.
actually suck more people into the experience. I think it's going to get better. It's funny. In Silicon Valley, I feel like the winds change quickly, and it was all about the metaverse last year, and then now it's all about AI, and I don't hear anything about the metaverse right this moment. And it'll switch back, and it'll be about the metaverse again, because someone's going to use these tools and they're going to create something that's just unbelievable that you can't get away from. You're just like, oh, I want to leave it open all day on my computer so I can be part of that. And I think that's kind of where it's going. uh, it's a little different, I think, because when you're creating for the metaverse, you're also trying to create a environment where people can kind of connect with one another and have fun and things be safe. And there's a lot of other things to think about, but when it comes to actual visuals of that metaverse, I think it's going to level up the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think it opens up a lot of options for the metaverse, and I think that, well, I mean, we're talking about AI and metaverse and those kinds of things. These things are all intertwined.
Yeah.
Kind of need AI in order for the metaverse to work. And one of the things that is really interesting about this is that I think one of the things that can really hold back the metaverse is if these environments are too static and too stale.
Yes.
And same thing with the people and animals who are populating it. If it all looks the same and you're going back to the same place over and over again, it gets boring real quick. So for allowing something like this, whether it's the companies creating it in house or user generated content to create new environments and new spaces to keep things constantly fresh, or to change their avatars or add pets or different kinds of experiences. Now maybe you're on an airship and you're flying around. Those kinds of things that are all generated with an Unreal Engine.
Hmm.
Then and that kind of rapid development, I think, is going to really unlock the experience and take it to another level.
Yeah. I'm excited about it, actually.
Yeah.
I feel like I've gotten excited twice this year. That's like it doesn't happen. Seriously, we've gone so many years where I'm just kind of like, oh, this is cool, this is interesting, right? And it's like there's been two events. One was ChatGPT and kind of seeing how it responds and realizing that it's only going to get 10 times better in the next 5 years, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
seeing this and seeing AI kind of progress the way that we wanted it to progress. I'm just so optimistic about tech and about what the future looks like now because I've had two moments this year where it's like blown me away.
I think for people like us who've been in this for so long and seen things, I mean, seen so many things work and so many other things not work, you get a little jaded. But when you see things that actually represent a technological advancement rather than just repackaging of old technology in a new way, I think it stands out, and
Yeah.
it's really impactful for
You know
us
who
when
I
we
think
see.
would have really loved this was Steve Jobs. I think he loved the progression of like visual mediums like this. And I
Mm-hmm.
actually was thinking about that when I saw this. I was like, I bet you he would have loved this. He would have been like, man, this is awesome. Right? Like
Well,
there's
he was
such a
famously very involved in Pixar
he
in,
was,
in
yeah.
the early days of Pixar for sure. So yeah, I think him, George Lucas, a lot of these people, a lot of the storytellers out there who probably looked at and said, "I can't tell this story from for one reason or the other. Maybe it's not possible. Maybe it's too expensive." I remember when Jurassic Park came out, and that was one of the first times we'd seen computer generated images that looked photorealistic enough to be compelling on the screen, and
Yeah.
it felt like a massive leap forward. And now this is something that just takes that to the next level.
Yeah. I was watching Jurassic Park over again recently and it's not that bad. Like I
Well, the
think that was,
first one was great.
yeah, it was like 93 or something. And that was a really long time
Yeah.
ago. And I was looking at it and I was like, wow, this is really good. You know what it is too is like when you're editing and you have like lag and different issues related to technology, basically technology problems. Like for example, the
Hmm.
machines weren't rendering fast enough and that kind of stuff in the 90s. They would just cut it. They would just be like, okay, quickly go from this scene to this scene and this scene to this scene and allow your imagination to fill in the gaps. I feel like with this stuff, you don't actually have to do that as much.
Yeah, I think it opens things up. I back in those days, you would set up a cray or something like that
Oh gosh, a cray.
to render an image over a weekend, and you'd get like 2 frames back. Now it's all being rendered in real time.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
You want to hear a story about the cray real quick?
Sure.
So I I was one of the students who was part of this advanced computer class that was offered, and it wasn't offered pretty much anywhere in the country, but it was offered here. And one of the things that we were able to do was to take some some designs that we had created in class. We would upload them to the Cray computers over at the Lawrence Livermore Laboratories. It would
Oh wow.
process them, and then the next day you come in and you would see what your 3D render looked like, and it was amazing. So I would upload, it would take all night to upload. And then you come back the next day and it had crunched it and then it outputted it. And it was so cool because there the reason why this happened and we had this opportunity was there just happened to be an enthusiast over at the Lawrence Livermore Labs who knew the teacher of our class who used to work at Lawrence Livermore Labs and said, "Hey, let me talk to them about allowing you guys to connect your computers over modems and upload these things and try it out." And it kind of fundamentally changed my thinking about everything because I was able to experience supercomputing at such a young age. It was super cool.
Yeah. And now, 20 something years later, we can now surpass what a Cray could do. We have the software and hardware systems in order to do it, and it's using a desktop system.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, those were huge. I remember seeing them.
Yeah.
We did a tour, and I was like, "Oh my god, these massive machines!" Right? But
Mhm.
that's what we did. Government funding kind of gave us that opportunity to try to build these massive supercomputers, and they
Mhm.
did, and it allowed us to log into them. So I see all this stuff, and I'm envious of all the young students who get to like just jump right into this stuff and start developing their careers around it because it's a very exciting time. But this was super cool, D. I'm curious how this is going to unfold because I do feel like there hasn't been a lot of news about this, and it
Mhm.
really does feel like a fundamental shift in the industry. So hopefully
Yeah,
people
and
listen
there are
listen to this.
concerns. I mean, there are going to be some concerns around deep fakes, and because you could very easily like record somebody or take images of them and create fake renders of them and things like that. So there's going to have to be some thought around that. And there's also always a potential that like movie studios or somebody else will abuse the disability in some way. So it's not all 100% wine and roses, but the technology and the possibilities are very exciting.
Absolutely. Well, thanks everyone so much for listening. Really appreciate it. As we've mentioned many times, we now have a YouTube channel. We don't have a lot of followers yet. So if you guys don't mind going in and following us or subscribing to the channel, that would be great. But also, if you like this podcast and found it interesting or informative, it helps us a great deal if you subscribe and leave a review on whatever platform you listen to us on. But thank you all, and we will see you all next week.